Welcome back to this series of reforms. We in the past few videos we've been talking about reforms. The last one we talked about pure church and pure social reforms. In the next few videos we're going to be talking about mixed reforms, which means reforms that go across church and society boundaries. That is either coming from the church to the society or from the society to the church. In this present video, we're going to first of all talk about reforms coming from the society targeting the church, and that's what we call syncretism. So we're going to be talking about syncretism in the next few minutes or so. Okay, now syncretism is not a new word. Actually, it was first used in 1618 to mean the combination of different beliefs. Okay. Now, but it came into the church during the missionary work when the missionaries went to Africa, and they found out that many of the Africans, they were bringing the local tradition to the church. So that was when syncretism actually started being used in the church. Okay, it was actually used in the society before, but now it came into the church because of that. Later on, we found out that if you go by the definition of syncretism actually entered the church right from the first century. So it wasn't the Africans to first bring syncretism to the church. So syncretism has existed right from the first century. Now let's look at what theologians, how they define syncretism now. And if you actually go into the literature, you find out that many theologians are now retracing back syncretism to the first century, starting from Gnosticism. There are a lot of, we're going to talk more about it later on. Now let's see how theologians define syncretism. It says, syncretism is the reshaping of Christian beliefs and practices through cultural accommodation so that they consciously or unconsciously blend with those of the dominant culture. Okay, so the word culture, we have to notice that that's the main significant word there, culture. So syncretism is when you bring a culture from the society, you bring it to the church and start doing exactly the way you do in the society. You do the same way in the church. That's syncretism. Now, remember we defined in last video, we defined 8 spheres of the society. Okay, art, business, church and religion, design, distribution, education, government, and earth. Syncretism, if you bring any of those cultures from any sphere into the church, that's syncretism. Although the church has been focusing more on the religious aspect, bringing religion to the church, but anything you bring from any society, any culture you bring to the church is also syncretism. Okay. The one thing though is that syncretism, it can either bring negative, it can either be negative impact, bring negative impact to the church, or transparent. Syncretism cannot bring positive impact to the church because the church is bright on itself, so there's nothing from the society that's going to brighten the church. So let's take that one. So we said that any reforms can have 3 impacts: positive, negative, or no impact. But syncretism cannot bring any positive impact to the church. It can either be negative or transparent. Now, I can also tell you now from the definition of the way we define syncretism now, every church is syncretic. Why? Now, many churches, you speak your language in the church. Language is also a culture from the family sphere. So if you speak language in your church, you are syncretic. Although speaking language does not have any impact on it doesn't bring any negative impact to the church, because God Himself created language. So that's why I said syncretism can either be transparent or negative. So things like language in the church, although it's syncretic, but it doesn't affect the church, so it's acceptable. There are some other things that can actually be neutral too, just like music. And I can tell you, okay, that some can be no impact and can also have negative impact. I'll give you an example. If you bring music into the church, if just ordinarily playing guitar, the same normal natural way you play guitar is okay. Now, but if you play the guitar the way you play for a certain cult, that's syncretic, because you are bringing that culture into the church. So the thing is that you can do some things in the society. If you do it the same way you do it in a particular culture and you bring it to the church, that's syncretic. So now we got the definition of syncretism clear. Now we need to, if you want to know how syncretism entered the church, we need to go a little bit into the history of the church. And there's always a good thing about learning the history of the church. One, history helps us to learn. For example, if we made some errors, now we learn from history to correct the errors. And sometimes there were some corrections that were made in history, which were actually corrections made in error. So from history also, we learn as the church grows. Now let's start from the first how the church started from the apostles. Okay, we read the Bible, we know that the church started from the apostles. Those were the first reformers of the church. We talked about that in Pure Church Reforms, that what the apostles did was just to give us initial doctrine and also church administration. That's Pure Church Reforms. But we know that the apostles, after the apostles, we have the apostolic fathers. Those apostolic fathers were those who walk with the apostles before they die. Some of them witnessed them, like Clement of Rome, like Polycarp, like Ignatius. Those people, they work with the apostles, and then after the apostolic fathers, we have the church fathers. One of them popular, Tertullian. Now, those ones, they took over from the apostolic fathers. Now, the apostles, the apostolic fathers, and the church fathers, almost all of them were martyred. So they went through a lot of persecutions. And in fact, Polycarp, he was actually given option to curse Christ, deny Christ for his freedom. He refused. So we see those people were very strong in the faith, and that's why we are enjoying what they did for us now today, because they suffer for the faith. Now, how many of us can do that now? Although there are still some areas in Asia, China, India, they are still being persecuted for the religion, for the faith. So there were a lot of persecution. Actually, persecution started right from the Sanhedrin, when Peter preached, and the first preaching of Peter in Acts chapter 3, after the layman was healed at the Beautiful Gate. Persecution started from there. Then after that, the Romans picked it up. The Romans too, they were guilty of the crucifixion of Jesus, so they had to be persecuting the Christians. They were given all kind of excuse, because they said they loved each other. They said they were practicing incest, because they take the Holy Communion, they take the body of Christ. They said they were cannibals. They were just giving all those flimsy things to persecute them, and they were using them as gladiators. So there were a lot of persecutions. Now the Romans, there were two empires that time. You have the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. So the who actually ended the persecution, there was one particular emperor of the East who was very wicked, persecuting the Christian. Actually, he asked the Christian then to go and get certificate that they will bow down to their gods and they will relinquish Christianity, you know. And many of the Christians then they went ahead and do what is they said, they bowed down, but some of them refused. And some of them, actually that's when corruption entered the church. Some of them went to bribe the magistrate to get first certificate. Okay, so that's one of the negative reforms that entered church, corruption. Now, how did the persecution end? How did it end? There was this Constantine from a Gaulois who actually planned a coup, attacked Maxentius, who was the Western emperor then. He defeated him. Now, he claims that when he was fighting, he saw the cross on the sky. In the sky, he saw a cross. And that was what helped him to win the war. So, he decided to become a Christian. Thank God for that. And that's how persecution ended. That was in the year 313. Now, the Eastern Emperor then, who was very wicked, died actually in 311. Then there was another one who took over. Then the one who took over, Galerius, and the Licinius now defeated him just within 2 years. That one didn't last. So Licinius was the Eastern Emperor when Constantine defeated Maxentius in the Western Empire. So Constantine now talked to Licinius. They agreed together to end persecution of Christians and to accept Christianity as a state religion. Licinius accepted. They signed what is called the Edict of Milan. They signed that in 325, yes. But what happened is that Licinius, after some time, reneged on that. He continued to persecute again Christians. Although Licinius was actually, I think, was an in-law to Constantine. Constantine had to go and fight him and defeated him because of that. So Constantine had took over both Eastern and Western Empire. So that was when the Roman Empire became one. Constantine actually unified the empires. So now, since Constantine has taken hold of all the churches, all the Roman Empire, so Christianity now became a state religion. Now, one thing that actually, one good thing about it is that, it stabilized Christianity, but that thing brought a lot of things to the church, a lot of negative things. For example, favoritism, elitism. Some people were favored more than the others. You have elite Christians, and not only that, the government was now dictating to the church. And from our definition of syncretism, that's already syncretism. Instead of the church now making reforms to government, is the government not making reform to the church? That is syncretism. And And we still actually see this kind of things trying to happen these days in this present world. And we know the church fought for separation of the church and state. Kipper was one of who wrote about it. Kipper was a minister in Netherlands in those days. So we still see government syncretism in church today. I heard that like in Nigeria, the government was trying to say they want to be seen church account. Government has no business with the church. You don't bring your reform into the church. That's syncretism. It's not allowed. Christ does not give us that commission that the society should come to the church and be giving others. And actually in 1997, now we're going to talk about, when we start talking about some of the syncretism, how it started, you know that the Eastern church were very syncretic. Okay. Not too quite long ago, 1997 to be precise, there was one father in Ukraine, Father Boris they call him, was a because the Eastern Church they so much enjoy the government controlling the church that time. They were the most beneficiary to that. That father they complained about the influx of Christianity in Ukraine when the USSR broke into pieces. Now you have a lot of Christian churches moving to Ukraine. Then that father complained and said there were too many churches coming and the government is doing nothing about it. So now he's inviting the government to come and do something to the church. That is not allowed, father. Now let's look at the various forms of syncretism, how we came into the church. We're going to look at different forms of. I already talked about corruption. Corruption is not a church reform. It's something that is brought from outside to the church. So, heresy. Now, this syncretism comes in different forms. Heresy, corruption, false prophecy, religious syncretism. That's the one that is most popular. That's the one we refer to most often. So we're going to let's look at heresy. Heresy is when you preach something that is not supported by the Bible. You call it garbage. Okay? And that was what dominated the church in the early church, right from the first century. You see that most of the epistles were written to combat heresies. Like the letter to the Colossians was mostly to combat Gnosticism. That was a very popular heresy in those days, in the first century. There were so many other heresies that came. There was one guy called Mani, who brought Manichaeism. He was a Persian. He fused most of those heresies were fusing philosophies, Greek philosophies with Christian beliefs. Now, there are three sources of heresies those times. Three sources of heresies. Now, the first source is a lot of people, that in the first century, I'm talking about it, a lot of people were misinterpreting Paul's writing. They will misinterpret Paul's writing and add their own and form their own doctrine. That was why in some of the epistles, Paul was writing to combat those heresies. That's not what I mean. You are just using enticing words. The second source of heresy are some people, they claim they were eyewitnesses during the period of Jesus, and they were writing their own stuff, a lot of apocryphal messages. So people were writing their own, claiming that they were eyewitnesses of the event. The third source of heresy was when, as I mentioned, there are some people they mix, they uh, bring philosophy from outside. Philosophy is education, is from education sphere. They bring that philosophy, that culture from education, they bring it to the church, they mix it with the church belief and started forming their own doctrine. That one was the most common form of heresies in the first period, and there was a period they call period of scholasticism that was in the 11th century. There were a lot of people creating their own doctrine. There are a lot of heresies that were killed. That was one of the good things that Constantine did. Now, because what happened is immediately they took over, they made Christianity the state religion. They started, It started what is called the ecumenical council, church council, which means they meet. The first one was in 325. They meet and review different kind of heresies, whichever one they found that is heresy, is untrue, they will reject it and may actually expel whoever is forming that doctrine. They expel it from the church. And sometimes, in fact, heresy was used at a point in church to execute themselves. There are some people killed because of heresy. We see these days anybody just talk nonsense. Those periods, you don't just talk anything, you can be killed for that. Okay, so that was one of the good things that came to the church. Sometimes I think maybe we should go back to that period and start having church council. The whole world have a church council. We review all these heresies. Many people now talking anything, not preaching the truth. So that was what happened. That was one good thing that Constantine did. That church council, they were able to review, but it was it consumed their energy. And you remember that in Acts 2, there was this Pentecostalism that started. That time, they were consuming themselves with this heresy, combating heresy, and they forgot totally about Pentecostalism, Holy Spirit baptism. It was not until 19th century that we started witnessing back Pentecostalism. But it was this kind of thing that actually consumed the energy of the church that time. Heresy, combating heresies. Martyrdom. Okay, so heresy is one form of syncretism that entered into the church. And although we have different forms of syncretism, I've talked about government syncretism. Religious criticism is the most dangerous. That one would kill the light of the church completely. If you bring anything occultic into the church, accepted, that one is the most negative syncretic reform, bringing anything occultic into the church from the religious sphere. But you can bring any other thing from other culture and it also will still be syncretism, but it may have no impact on the church or it may be negative. Don't bring your occultic dance into the church or the art group, the art sphere. You can actually bring watch out when you bring some kind of dance into your church, because we see a lot of churches that they do dance drama in the church. If you are going to be doing some drama that is occultic into the church, that's syncretism. That thing can dim the light of the church. You don't want anything that can dim the light of the church. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about one important thing, because when we define syncretism, some people are not defining it in the right. They just think Africa is It's only Africa. Africa is syncretic. Africa, no, Africa is syncretism is everywhere. I said every church. Syncretism is everywhere. The only thing is that when you bring religious occultic thing to the church, that's the most dangerous one. That's the one that can actually totally take away the light of the church. I just want to mention two things before I close on syncretism. There's a new form of syncretism that is creeping to the church right now. You have the church endorsing same-sex marriage, and you see actually have some priests endorsing and conducting the same-sex marriage, calling it alternative lifestyle. God didn't tell us about any alternative lifestyle. There's only one lifestyle God mentioned in the Bible. That's a man with a woman, not a man with a man. So that's one form of syncretism. But another thing I just want to mention is I watch some videos on the YouTube. A preacher now defining syncretism. I just want us to be very cautious on the way we define things, because sometimes you might be you might be bringing your own heresy, that is preaching falsely, trying to say you want to correct somebody. And that's what I said at the beginning of the last video, that sometimes we should learn from history, not correcting with an error. Someone was trying to define syncretism in his own way, because he want to castigate Africans, because you have already taught that only Africans are syncretic. Africans are syncretic. As I mentioned in the video, syncretism actually started right from the 1st century, from all those heresies and fusing religious beliefs together was not even the first time, was not Africans. There was this guy called Mani who did it first. Okay, so just immediately after the Constantine took over, that period they had a lot of heresies going on in the church. Okay, this is what I want to talk about. There is one preacher saying Africans, they use objects in the church, like candles, like rod, as if it was the first time anyway. That is syncretism. This preacher actually specifically accused Apostle Joseph Adebabala. If you want to read the history of you need to get a copy of my book. I studied this apostle deeply. So if you don't know something about somebody, you just don't come and talk about it. Apostle Paul says you cannot be everything to the church. You have your own area of gift. Now you were talking that Apostle Babalola brought syncretism to Nigerian church. Now, I'm just going to use this example to demonstrate that if you are using objects in the church, it doesn't mean it's syncretism. At least we find it in the Bible. If you use objects in the church, symbolic objects, I call it, there are 4 possible scenarios. 4 possible things can be happening, and I'm going to mention the 4 things. Which the first thing is, if you claim that I'm using this object based on biblical teaching and it's not biblical, that is heresy. So if you are preaching falsely, saying you are supporting it with the Bible, that is heresy. That is not the case for Paola. And it's not claiming that it's getting it from the Bible. There are some people who will claim that it's from the Bible. That's number 2. If you claim God asks you to use it, because we have a lot of them right now. I understand the frustration of this preacher. I understand his profession. A lot of things going on now. You see on the internet, a lot of pastors, some will say, God asked me to touch women's part, in the public, Some sucking breast, all those kind of things. And I know that is why he came across, but it's wrongly defining syncretism. So if you say God asked you to use it, but God did not ask you to use it, but you are claiming falsely, although that one is very difficult to prove, but God gave us a clue on how we can prove that. That is called false prophecy. If you want, God gave us in Deuteronomy 18 verse 20 to 22 how to know false prophecy. God says, if the prophet says, I asked him to do it, and he has to work this way, but it's not working that way, that is false prophecy. So, that is not the case for Babalola. Number 3, if I use the object the way they use it in a particular culture in the society, especially if it's a occultic culture, in a cult, maybe they strike the ground with a rod, throw it in the air, then touch somebody. If you bring it to the church and do it the same way, you use the rod, you scratch the ground and touch somebody, that is syncretism. You are bringing a culture from the society to the church. You are using the rod the same way they use it in your cult. That is syncretism, and that's actually the most dangerous one. That one will dim the light of the church completely. We can kill the light. That's the third scenario. The fourth scenario is God actually asks you to use it in a specific way and it will work that way. That is manifesting God's power through symbolic objects. It happens. A lot of it in the Bible. God asked Moses to use the rod. It's not that God cannot, ordinary word, God can use word. He used word to create the whole world. But sometimes he wants to manifest his power through some object. You know, like Ezekiel. If you read the book of Isaiah, he has a boy. They used fig tree to rub his boy, to heal him. It's not that God's word is not sufficient. God's word is sufficient, but sometimes you use some symbolic object just to manifest the power of God. Now, Apostle Babalola, God, when he was called, actually before that, he was threatened to be killed if he doesn't obey his calling. So you can imagine this prophet will be scared not to do what he was instructed to do. He was given instructions on how to use. He was given 4 objects: rod, oil, handbell, and water, and was given specific instruction on how to use and what occasion to use each one. But throughout his ministry, Babalola actually concentrated on using 2 of those objects, water and handbell, and it worked the way God asked him to use it. That's manifesting the power of God. I'll give you an example. The handbell. Actually, if you talk about water is used in the Bible for healing. The same way, that's what God asked Babalola to use water for. Because the church believed in divine healing that time without using any medications. And they survived it. They were using water for healing. They would pray inside the water and give it to drink. Jesus, you can see, Naaman was ill, was asked to go and be dip himself in a river to heal him of leprosy. You see the pool of Bethesda in Acts chapter 3. All those kind of things. So water was, Jesus actually asked some lepers to go and bath in a river. So water is used for healing in the Bible. So the same way Apostle Babalola was instructed to use water for healing. So that's not syncretism. Please, it's not syncretism. Now, the fourth one, I say, if God asked you to use that object in a particular way and it works that way, that is manifesting the power of God, not syncretism. Please, let's get the definition right. Now, I'll give an example how the handbell worked. God gave him handbell to sound. When he sound handbell, it's going to shatter the kingdom of darkness. You see, it's not, God gave the power through his word, so that whenever the prophet sound his handbell, it was not Babalola was power, it was God's power. Whenever I sound it, because God has already spoken into that whenever you do that, this is going to happen. I'll tell you a story when that handbell was really worked. There was a village in Ondo State of Nigeria. That time, Babala was doing his missionary journey all the way. Everybody wants Babala to come to his city, village. But this village, they didn't invite Babala, but Babala went there himself without uninvited, because he had a mission there. This village, they had several gods, 7 important big ones. That is a small village, but they believe in this idol worshiping. They have this particular one, the most notorious of them is called Egule. Egule is placed on a mountain. They put a lot of charms inside a big pot, and I think a cobra hijacked the pot and ran it permanently. Nobody dare go into because it was a thick forest. Nobody dare enter into that forest. Babala went there. When Babala came to that town, he announced his mission that he was going to go to that mountain. Everybody was scared. What? You want to go there? Okay. Even those living at the base of the mountain, they had to desert their homes because they were scared. If their God dealt with Babala, it was going to descend on them. So they were scared. Everybody was scared in the village because it was a dreaded God. But when you have this confidence, you know the power of God is following you. You have that confidence. Then some people, actually Babala made the announcement in advance. So some people from the neighboring village, they heard about it. They sent emissaries to go and watch that fight. Everybody was thinking that was the end of Babala. Everybody wants to see how Babala was going to end up his life, because they believed that they are God than the Most High God. So the day Babala went, he went with his handbell and Bible. That's it. As he was going to the mountain, he was sounding his bell. That's the instruction he was given. He was sounding his bell, and speaking the word. Sounding his bell and speaking his word. Sounding his bell and speaking his word. When he got near the pot just scattered, broke into pieces. Imagine that. Then the cobra escaped. Some people who were watching at the base, they saw actually when the pot scattered, they set it ablaze. When they saw it everybody started rushing upward to, then they found the cobra on the way, they killed the cobra. That was the end of that God there. You see, Babala was instructed to use that handbell that way, and he used it. And it worked the same way God instructed him. Again, I said, if it is a false prophet, it won't work the way the prophet claimed God asked him to do it. There are a lot of them these days. You see everybody claiming God asked me to do this, God asked me to, but it won't work the same way God asked them to do it.